Hello viewers, welcome to the channel. My name is Antika and today I'm going to discuss a short story from the book Treasure Chest named The Model Millionaire by Oscar Wilde for my ICSE students of class 9. Let's get started. Now, before I start reading the story, I would like to give a brief introduction about the author, Oscar Wilde. Okay. Oscar Wilde was a famous Irish writer during the late 1800s, known for his clever wit, humor, and unique style of writing. He wrote plays, poems, and stories, with his most famous work being The Picture of Dorian Gray and The Importance of Being Honest. Oscar Wilde's writing made people laugh and think because he often poked fun at the society during the Victorian era. Though he became very successful, he later faced challenges in life. But today, he is remembered as one of the most famous writers of his time. Oscar Wilde lightly wrote this story, The Model Millionaire, not only to entertain people, but also to gently criticize how much Victorian society valued money and class. Oscar Wilde had a special way of mixing humor with deeper thoughts. And in this story, he shows that being kind and generous is more important than having lots of money. The story teaches that rich people like the Baron should use their wealth. Oscar Wilde also encourages readers not to judge people by how they look, as the beggar turns out to be a millionaire. In the end, the message is clear. Showing kindness and compassion can bring surprising and unexpected rewards. The story is set in late 19th century, an era when social class and wealth played a pivotal role in determining a person's status and opportunities in life. It reflects the British upper class's attitude towards money, relationships, and success. People like Huey, although charming and attractive, are shown to struggle because they lack the financial means, as in financial stability, which was critical for marriage and social standing. Let's start reading the story. Let's turn to page number 88. The Model Millionaire by Oscar Wilde. Unless one is wealthy, there is no use in being a charming fellow. This means if a person is not rich, being charming isn't very helpful because people are more impressed by wealth rather than by personality. Next, romance is the privilege of the rich, not the profession of the unemployed. So here we can see the author says that only wealthy people can truly afford to enjoy romance. If a person is broke, he or she cannot focus on love. Rather, the person needs to focus on survival. Next, the poor should be practical and prosaic. It is better to have a permanent income than to be fascinating. So now we get to know that the poor people need to be realistic and focus on practical things rather than wasting their time dreaming and fantasizing about the future. We also get to know that the author says having a steady income is more important rather than being charming or interesting. Next, these are the great truths of modern life which Huey Erskine never realized. So, these are the important lessons in life, but Huey never understood them. Next, poor Huey. Intellectually, we must admit, he wasn't of much importance. Here we get to see another character trait of Huey, that he wasn't very smart or remarkable in terms of his intelligence. Next, he never said a brilliant or even an ill-natured thing in his life. Huey never made a clever or mean comment in his entire life. Therefore, we can say that he was quite ordinary. Next, but then he was wonderfully good looking with crisp brown hair, his clear-cut profile and his grey eyes. Another thing we get to know about Huey is that he was very handsome, with striking brown hair, well-defined facial features, and grey eyes. Next, he was as popular with men as he was with women, and he had every accomplishment except that of making money. So, Huey was well liked by everyone, but there was one thing that he couldn't do, that was to earn money. Next, his father had bequeathed him his cavalry sword and a history of the Peninsular War in 15 volumes. So, we get to know that Huey's father left him two things, a military sword and a large set of books. The history of Peninsular War refers to the war between England and Napoleon Bonaparte's France, mostly fought in Spain and Portugal, that means the Iberian Peninsula, in the early 1800s. While the story mentions this book in 15 volumes, no such set of book actually exists. Wilde probably made it up to give the impression the kind of serious books the English aristocracy might keep on their shelves during that time. It helps create an image of old-fashioned, traditional habits among the upper class. Huey hung the first over his looking glass and put the second on a shelf between Ruff's Guide and Bailey's magazine. Huey used the sword as decoration in the room and kept the books on a shelf between Bailey's magazine and Ruff's Guide, and lived on 200 a year that an old aunt allowed him, while living on a small monthly allowance of £200 from an old aunt. Next, he had tried everything. He had gone on the stock exchange for 6 months. But what was a butterfly to do among bulls and bears? Here we get to know that Huey tried various occupations. He tried working in finance, as in the stock exchange. But he was too gentle and out of place for the aggressive world of the stock exchange. The terms bulls and bears are used in the world of stock market. A bull is a person who buys stocks expecting the prices to go up, hoping to make a profit when they sell later at a higher price. They are optimistic and believe that the market will rise. On the other hand, a bear is someone who expects the prices to drop, and they might sell stocks or commodities hoping to buy them back at a lower price. These terms create a vivid image of the stock market as a battle between bulls and bears. That means rising prices and falling prices. Next, he had been a tea merchant for a little longer, but had soon tired of Pekoe and Souchong. Pekoe and Souchong are types of black tea. Now we get to know that he also tried selling two types of black tea named Pekoe and Souchong, but he soon lost interest and got tired of the business. Next, then he had tried selling dry sherry. That did not answer. The sherry was a little too dry. Now we get to know that he also attempted to sell sherry, which is a type of wine. But it did not work out either. The wine was probably too dry to appeal to people. Next, ultimately, he became nothing. A delightful, ineffectual young man with a perfect profile and no profession. So far, we have seen that Huey was not successful in anything. He was charming but ineffective, with no job or career. Next, to make matters worse, he was in love. On top of his failures, Huey had fallen in love, which made his situation more complicated. Next, the girl he loved was Laura Merton, the daughter of a retired colonel who had lost his temper and his digestion in India and had never found either of them again. Now we get to know about Huey's love interest, Laura Merton, who was the daughter of a retired English military officer who became grumpy and unhealthy after his time in India. The narrator suggests that the retired colonel, after his experiences in India, not only lost his temper, likely due to stress or frustration, but also his digestion, symbolizing poor health. The witty remark that he never found either of them again adds humor, implying that these losses have become permanent features of his character. Laura loved Huey, and Huey was so in love with Laura that he would do anything for her, even something as humble as kissing her shoes. Next. They were the handsomest couple in London and had not a penny piece between them. Next. Come to me, my boy, when you have £10,000 of your own, and we will see about it, he used to say. The colonel told Huey to return when he had saved £10,000, implying that only then would he consider allowing the marriage. And Huey looked very glum on those days and had to go to Laura for consolation. On days when Huey felt sad and frustrated, he would go to Laura, his girlfriend, to cheer himself up. One morning, he was on his way to Holland Park, where the Mertons lived. He dropped in to see a great friend of his, Alan Trevor. Trevor was a painter, but he was also an artist, and artists are rather rare. So we understand that one day on his way to Laura, he decided to stop by the studio of his good friend Alan Trevor. Trevor was a talented painter, but he was much more than just that. He was a true artist, which is something special and rare. This line playfully comments how common it has become to take up artistic pursuits like painting, implying that it has almost become a trend. Here, the narrator is making a witty observation that at that time, being a painter did not require any special or unique skills. That is why he said, few people escape that nowadays. Next. Personally, he was a strange, rough fellow with a freckled face and a red ragged beard. We get to see that Trevor was a rough-looking guy with freckled face and messy red beard. Next. However, when he took up the brush, he was a real master and his pictures were eagerly sought after. So, despite his appearance, Trevor was a brilliant artist and people really liked to buy his paintings. He had been very much attracted by Huey at first. It must be acknowledged entirely on account of his personal charm. At first, Trevor liked Huey mainly because of his charm and good looks. Next, the only people a painter should know, he used to say, are people who are beautiful, people who are artistic pleasure to look at, and intellectual repose to talk to. Now, Trevor believes that painters should only associate with beautiful and charming people because they make the world seem more pleasant. Intellectual repose suggests a state of mental relaxation or calmness, where one engages in thoughtful, reflective conversation. They likely mean that they are seeking a dialogue that is both stimulating and soothing, where ideas flow freely and thoughtfully without any stress or agitation. It's about engaging in meaningful conversation that promotes mental relaxation and intellectual satisfaction. Next, men who are dandies and women who are darlings rule the world. At least they should do so. According to Alan Trevor, stylish, charming men and stylish, lovely young women should be the ones in charge of the world. This line suggests individuals who embody charm, elegance, and style. Men who are dandies and women who are darlings have a certain power or influence in the society. The statement implies that these qualities of refinement, attractiveness, and charisma naturally grant these people a higher status. Therefore, they deserve to rule the world. The witty remark at the end, at least they should do so, hints at the speaker's playful belief that ideally the world should be run by those with grace and charm, rather than by other qualities like brute strength or sheer intellect. It is a clever commentary on the social value of beauty and charm. Next, however, after he got to know Huey better, he liked him quite as much for his bright, buoyant spirits and his gorgeous reckless nature, and had given him the permanent entry to his studio. So now we get to know that after knowing Huey better, Trevor liked him not just for his looks, but also for his cheerful personality and generous nature. He gave Huey free access to his studio at any time. Next, when Huey came in, he found Trevor putting the finishing touches to a wonderful life-size picture of a beggar man. When Huey entered the studio, Trevor was finishing a life-sized, as in a full picture of a beggar man. Next, the beggar himself was standing on a raised platform in a corner of the studio. The beggar, who was being used as a model for the painting, was standing on a platform in the studio. Next, he was a wizened old man, wizened as in wrinkled in appearance, with a face like wrinkled parchment and a most piteous expression. Now, we get to know that the beggar was an old man with a very wrinkled face, and he looked sad and pitiful. Next, over his shoulders was flung a coarse brown cloak, all tears and tatters. His thick boots were patched and cobbled. Now we see that the beggar was wearing a torn, shabby brown cloak as in a large robe, and his boots were old and mended, and with one hand he leant on a rough stick, while with the other he held out his battered hat for alms. Alms as in money or goods offered to the poor. So the beggar leant on a stick with one hand and held out his hat with the other hand, as if asking for money. Next, "What an amazing model," whispered Huey as he shook hands with his friend. Huey noticed the model and whispered to Trevor, amazed by how perfect the beggar looked as a model for the painting. Next, "An amazing model," shouted Trevor at the top of his voice. "I should think so. Such beggars as he are not to be met with every day." We see that Trevor loudly agrees with Huey, saying that beggars like this one are very rare to find. Next, "A living Velasquez, my stars. What an etching Rembrandt would have made of him." Trevor was so impressed by the beggar's appearance that he compared him to the subjects of great painters like Velasquez and Rembrandt, saying that those masters would have loved to paint him. Next, "Poor old chap," said Huey, "how miserable he looks. But I suppose, to you painters, his face is his fortune." You see that Huey feels bad for the beggar, commenting on how sad he looks. He then jokes that the beggar's sad appearance is actually good for painters like Alan Trevor, because this quality makes the beggar a perfect model. Next, "Certainly," replied Trevor. "You don't want a beggar to look happy, do you?" Trevor agrees, saying that a beggar shouldn't look happy. His sad look is perfect for his painting. Next, "How much does a model get for sitting?" asked Huey, as he found himself a comfortable seat on a divan. Huey, curious to know how much the beggar gets paid, asks Trevor while getting comfortable on a sofa. Next, "A shilling an hour." Trevor tells Huey that the model earns 1 shilling for each hour that he sits. Next, "And how much do you get for your picture, Alan?" Huey then asks how much Trevor will make for painting the next. "Oh, for this, I get 2,000 pounds. Trevor says that he will earn 2,000 for the painting, to which Huey gets surprised and asks if it is 2,000 pounds. Guineas. Painters, poets, physicians always get guineas. A guinea is a unit of money. In Britain, that is what? Slightly more than a pound. Trevor clarifies that he will be paid in guineas, which was a more prestigious form of currency used by professionals like painters, poets, and doctors. Next. Well, I think the model should have a percentage, cried Huey, laughing. They work quite as hard as you do. Huey jokes that the model deserves a share of the money because he works just as hard as the painter. Next. Nonsense. Nonsense. Why? Look at the trouble of laying on the paint alone and standing all day long at one's easel. It's all very well, Huey, for you to talk, but I assure you that there are moments when art almost attains to the dignity of manual labor. Easel means a wooden stand used by artists to hold up the painting. Trevor dismisses Huey's joke by saying that painting is hard work too. He argues that being an artist sometimes feels as tough as doing physical labor, as in literal hard work that requires a lot of physical labor. Next. But you mustn't chatter. I am very busy. Smoke a cigarette and keep quiet. Trevor tells Huey to stop talking and let him work, suggesting that she relax with a cigarette instead. Next. After some time, the servant came in and told Trevor that the frame maker wanted to speak to him. Now we get to see that a servant comes in and informs Trevor that the person making the frame for the painting needs to talk to him. Next. Don't run away, Huey, he said as he went out. I will be back in a moment. As Trevor leaves, he tells Huey to stay put, as in stay there, promising to return shortly. Next. The old beggar man took advantage of Trevor's absence to rest for a moment on a wooden bench that was behind him. So we see that Trevor is gone and the beggar takes a break and sits down on a bench being tired. Next, he looked so forlorn and wretched that Huey could not help pitying him and felt in his pockets to see what money he had. Forlorn here means sad and lonely. Now we see that Huey feels sorry for the beggar, seeing how miserable he looks, and checks his pockets to find some money to give to him. Next, all he could find was a sovereign and some coppers. Poor old fellow, he thought to himself. Now we see that Huey only has a sovereign, that means a gold coin, and coppers, that means some smaller coins in his pocket. But it means no hansoms for a fortnight. And he walked across the studio and slipped the sovereign into the beggar's hand. Now, Huey thinks to himself that the beggar needs the money more than he does, even though it means that Huey won't be able to afford riding in a hansom cab, which was a type of carriage at that time, for 2 whole weeks, fortnight as in 2 weeks. Huey quietly goes over and gives the beggar the sovereign coin. Next, the old man started, and a faint smile flitted across his withered lips. Thank you, sir, he said. Thank you. Flitted means spread. The smile spread over his face. Flitted means spread. The smile spread over the beggar's face. The beggar looks surprised by this generous gift, and a small smile appears on his wrinkled face. Thanks Huey gratefully. Then Trevor arrived, and Huey took his leave, blushing a little at what he had done. Now, when Trevor comes back, Huey quickly leaves. Probably he was feeling a bit embarrassed about giving money to the beggar. Next, he spent the day with Laura, got a charming scolding for his extravagance, and had to walk home. Now we see that Huey spends the time with Laura, but she playfully scolds him for being too generous. probably because he didn't have much money to begin with. As a result, Huey doesn't have enough money to pay for a cab and he walks home. Next, that night he strolled into the Palette Club. Palette Club means a place where artists and their friends hang out. Okay, about 11 o'clock, and found Trevor sitting by himself in the smoking room, drinking hock and seltzer. We see that later that night, Huey goes to the Palette Club, place where artists and their friends hang out. Okay, he goes to the Palette Club around 11 o'clock. And there he finds his friend Alan Trevor relaxing with a drink. Next, well, Alan, did you get the picture finished all right? He said as he lit his cigarette. So here we can see that Huey asks Trevor whether he has completed painting the beggar while lighting a cigarette. Next, finished and framed, my boy, answered Trevor. And by the by, you have made a conquest. That old model you saw is quite devoted to you. I had to tell him all about you, who you are, where you live, what your income is, what prospects you have. Trevor here proudly tells that the painting is not only done but also framed. Then he surprises Huey by saying that the beggar really likes him. Trevor even told the beggar all about Huey's personal details, where he lives, how much money he makes, and all his future plans. Next, my dear Alan, cried Huey, I shall probably find him waiting for me when I go home. Huey jokes that the beggar might show up at his house after hearing all his details. Next, but of course you are only joking. Poor old wretch. I wish I could do something for him. Here, Huey feels sorry for the beggar and wishes that he could help him more, like giving him some old clothes since the beggar's clothes were all in tatters. But he looks splendid in them, said Trevor. I wouldn't paint him in a frock coat for anything. Next, but he looks splendid in them, said Trevor. I wouldn't paint him in a frock coat for anything. What you call rags, I call romance. What seems poverty to you is picaresqueness to me. However, I'll tell him of your offer. Picaresque as in visually attractive or charming in an old-fashioned way. So Trevor, being the artist, disagrees. He thinks that the beggar looks perfect in the ragged clothes and says that he wouldn't paint him in any fancy clothing. Trevor views the beggar's poverty as something visually interesting or romantic for his art. Next, Alan, said Huey seriously, you painters are a heartless lot. Now, suddenly Huey gets a bit serious and criticizes Trevor by saying that artists like him don't have much compassion. An artist's heart is his head, replied Trevor. And besides, our business is to realize the world as we see it, not to reform it as we know it. Now, Trevor defends himself by saying that artists use their brains to create art, not their emotions. He believes that an artist's job is to show the world as it is, not to try to change it or fix its problems. And now, tell me how Laura is. The old model was quite interested in her. Now, Trevor shifts the conversation to Laura and tells Huey that even the old beggar was interested to know more about her. Next, you don't mean to say you talked to him about her? Said Huey. So Huey is shocked to know that Trevor has told the old beggar about his girlfriend, Laura. Next, certainly I did. He knows all about the relentless colonel, the lovely Laura, and the 10,000 pounds. Trevor confirms that he told the beggar everything, including details about Laura's father, the strict colonel, and the 10,000 pounds that Huey needs to marry Laura. Next, "You told that old beggar all my private affairs," cried Hughie, looking very red and angry. Now, Hughie actually gets very upset, turning red with anger, because Trevor had revealed all his personal information to the old beggar. In this part of the story, we can see that Hughie's kindness and sensitivity clash with Trevor's more detached artistic view of the world. Trevor sees the beggar as part of his art, while Hughie sees him as a human being in need of help. This difference in perspective creates a tension between the two friends. Next, "My dear boy," said Trevor, smiling, "that old beggar, as you call him, is one of the richest men in Europe." Now, Trevor reveals a shocking truth to Hughie. The man he thought was a mere poor beggar was actually one of the wealthiest men in Europe. Next, he could buy all London tomorrow without overdrawing his account. He has a house in every capital, dines of gold plate, and can prevent Russia going to war when he chooses. Here, Trevor actually exaggerates to make his point clear about Baron Hughesburg, who appeared to pose as the old beggar model. This man, Baron Hughesburg, is incredibly rich and powerful. He can afford anything, even influence over world events like wars. Next. "What on earth do you mean?" exclaimed Hughie. Hughie is completely surprised and shocked by what Trevor is saying. Next. "What I say," said Trevor, "the old man you saw today in the studio was Baron Hughesburg. He's a great friend of mine, buys all my pictures and that sort of thing, and gave me a commission a month ago to paint him as a beggar." Trevor here explains that the beggar is actually Baron Hughesburg, who asked Trevor to paint him dressed as a poor man. Baron Hughesburg also buys many of Trevor's paintings. Next. "And I must say, he made a magnificent figure in his rags, or perhaps I should say in my rags. They are an old suit I got in Spain." Trevor continues to joke by saying that the beggar's clothes were actually his old worn-out suit that he got in Spain. He thinks that Baron Hughesburg looked great in them because it was a perfect prop for the painting, and he looked great in them as he posed for the painting. Next. "Baron Hughesburg," cried Hughie. "Good heavens, I gave him a sovereign," and he sank into an armchair, the picture of dismay. Here, Hughie is horrified. He realizes that he gave a sovereign, that means a gold coin, to one of the richest men in Europe. He feels foolish and collapses into an armchair, feeling overwhelmed. Next. "Give him a sovereign," shouted Trevor, and he burst into a roar of laughter. "My dear boy, you will never see it again." Trevor was very much surprised because Hughie gave the beggar a sovereign, which was a gold coin. That means it was worth a lot of money to Hughie, as he himself didn't have much money to begin with, right? So Trevor finds the situation hilarious and jokes that Hughie is never getting that sovereign back. Next. "I think you might have told me, Alan," said Hughie sulkily, "and not have let me make such a fool of myself." So Hughie, feeling embarrassed and upset, complains that Trevor should have warned him so that he wouldn't have given the money to a rich man and embarrassed himself. Next. "Well, to begin with, Hughie," said Trevor, "it never entered my mind that you went about distributing alms in that reckless way." So now Trevor explains that he didn't expect Hughie would just start giving money away like that, especially not to someone who looked like a poor model. Next. "I can understand you're kissing a pretty model, but you're giving a sovereign to an ugly one. By Jove, no." So here Trevor jokingly says that he could imagine Huey being generous to a beautiful model, but giving money to an ugly beggar is surprising him. Here, the phrase by Jove is used as an expression of surprise or emphasis. Oscar Wilde uses it to convey a sense of astonishment or emphasis in the dialogue. Now, in mythology, Jove is another name for Jupiter, the king of the gods in Roman mythology. So, Jupiter or Jove was the god of sky and thunder and was considered the ruler of both God and humans. So, whenever the expression by Jove is used, it is an exclamation or oath used to express surprise or astonishment. Now, in English literature and in everyday speech, whenever we use Jove's name, it sort of adds a sense of gravity or emotion to what's being said. Next. Besides, the fact is that I really was not at home today to anyone. And when you came in, I didn't know whether Schussberg would like his name mentioned. You know, he wasn't in full dress. Now, Trevor adds that he wasn't expecting any visitors that day. And he didn't know if Baron Schussberg would want his true identity to be revealed while he was dressed as a beggar. Next. What a duffer he must think me, said Huey. Huey feels embarrassed and calls himself a duffer. Means he thinks Baron Schussberg must think he is foolish for giving money to a rich man like him. Next. Not at all. He was in the highest spirits after you left, kept chuckling to himself and rubbing his old wrinkled hands together. So, Trevor assures Huey that Baron Schussberg wasn't offended. In fact, he found the situation to be quite amusing and couldn't stop laughing about it after Huey left. Next, I couldn't make out why he was so interested to know all about you. But I see it now. He will invest your sovereign for you. Huey, pay you the interest every 6 months and have a capital story to tell after dinner. So, Trevor tells us that he finally understands why Baron Schussberg wanted to know so much about Huey. He jokes that the Baron will probably invest his sovereign and make Huey a rich man, while also enjoying telling the story to others in dinner parties. This section humorously highlights the differences between appearance and reality. Huey's kind gesture, which was actually meant for someone in need, turns out to be given to one of the wealthiest person in Europe. Oscar Wilde uses this twist to mock social norms and expectations while showing Huey's good heart and naivety. Next, I am an unlucky devil, growled Huey. The best thing I can do is to go to bed. And my dear Alan, you mustn't tell anyone. I wouldn't dare show my face in the room. So Huey feels unlucky and upset. He regrets giving his money to Baron Schussberg, thinking that it was a foolish mistake. Now, Huey is actually so embarrassed that he doesn't want anyone to find out about it. He's especially worried that people in more fashionable areas in London, like Row, which is a short form for Savile Row. Savile Row is a famous street in London, quite well known in the 19th century for its high-end fashion and luxury tailoring. Row became a hub for men's suits, where wealthy individuals, including aristocrats and influential people, would go to have custom-made clothing. Therefore, it remains iconic for its association with elegance and fine tailoring. Next, nonsense. It reflects the highest credit on your philanthropic spirit, Huey. And don't run away. Have another cigarette, and you can talk about Laura as much as you like. Now, we can see that Trevor tries to comfort Huey by saying that giving money to a poor man, even though it turned out to be a rich baron, shows that Huey has a kind and generous heart. Next, however, Huey wouldn't stop, but walked home, feeling very unhappy and leaving Alan Trevor in fits of laughter. So, while Trevor finds this whole situation to be very amusing, Huey feels sad and embarrassed as he walks back home. The next morning, as he was at breakfast, the servant brought him up a card on which was written Monsieur Gustave Norden on behalf of Monsieur le Baron Huysberg. So the next morning, Huey receives a visit from a man named Monsieur Gustave Norden, who is representing Monsieur le Baron Huysberg. Next, I suppose he has come for an apology, said Huey to himself, and he told the servant to show the visitor up. As this other person, Gustave Norden, arrives, Huey assumes that the Baron is upset about what had happened and that the visitor had come to demand an apology from him. Next, an old gentleman with gold spectacles and grey hair came into the room and said in a slight French accent, "Have I the honor of addressing Monsieur Askin?" Huey bowed. So Monsieur Norden, an older man with glasses and grey hair, arrives and asks if Huey is the person he is looking for, addressing him politely in French. Next, "I have come from Baron Huysberg," he continued. The Baron. So here we can see, as soon as this older man started to introduce himself and say why he arrived at that place, Huey interrupts him. Next line. "I beg, sir, that you will offer him my sincerest apologies," stammered Huey. Now, Huey immediately apologizes, feeling awkward and thinking he needs to explain why he gave Baron Huysberg the sovereign. Next, "The Baron," said the old gentleman with a smile, "has commissioned me to bring you this letter." And he extended a sealed envelope. So now we get to see that instead of asking for an apology, this person, Norden, says that Baron Huysberg has sent a letter for Huey. Next, on the outside was written, "A wedding present to Hugh Erskine and Laura Melton from an old beggar." And inside was a check for £10,000. The letter contains a beautiful surprise, a wedding gift from Baron Huysberg, who jokingly signs it as an old beggar. Inside the letter is a check for £10,000, which is exactly the amount Huey needed to marry Laura. Next, when they were married, Alan Trevor was the best man, and the Baron made a speech at the wedding breakfast. So, thanks to Baron Huysberg's generosity, Huey and Laura can finally get married. Alan Trevor is the best man at Huey's wedding, and Baron Huysberg not only attends the wedding but also gives a speech at the wedding breakfast. Next, "Millionaire models," remarked Alan, "are rare enough, but by Jove, model millionaires are rarer still." So finally, at the end, Alan Trevor makes another witty comment, pointing out that while it is quite unusual to find rich people posing as models, it is even more rare to find a millionaire as generous and kind-hearted as Baron Huysberg. Now, there are three main themes in this story: class and wealth, appearance and reality, and generosity. In Class and Wealth, the story explores how wealth influences relationships and opportunities, particularly in marriage. In Appearance and Reality, we can see that the beggar who turns out to be a millionaire shows how appearances can be deceiving. In the theme of generosity, we can see that Huey's kind-hearted yet naive generosity is rewarded in the end, showing that good deeds do not go unnoticed. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please do. It helps my channel a lot and it helps you to get the notifications quickly. That is all for now. I hope this helped. Bye.